about Noodles and Company, and I actually had read this case in a class, I think it was last semester too, so it was kind of nice to get a little bit of a refresher on it, because it's pretty fascinating how quickly they were able to be successful. Obviously, they still have a little bumps and bruises on the way, but they're clearly successful now. So the case basically just starts off with Aaron Kennedy, who's the founder, trying to figure out how to take his business to the next level and reach the next tier of restaurant ship, I guess. They'd already expanded into several states and had made millions and millions and millions, but he just wasn't sure about the further growth and progression after that point. So first, the first question is just, what is the fast casual segment? And I hadn't really realized before I read this case for a different class that there was kind of a classification. I just hadn't really paid attention to it. I just knew what I liked to eat, and sure, some places were more expensive than others, but I didn't really think about classifying different like fast food restaurants, I guess. So what are some of your guys' favorite fast casual restaurants?
There's one in Utah called Cafe Rio, and it's I don't know if outside of Utah if you've ever heard of it, but it's a fantastic place and family favorite here in Salt Lake in Utah.
We had that 2 nights ago, actually.
Yeah.
There's one in the Utah area that some BYU students started that's salads and soups and sandwiches. I don't remember the name of it. But it reminded me of this Noodles and Company model.
Was it Zupas? Does that sound familiar?
What is it called? Zupas?
Zupas? Yeah.
Yeah, it sounded a lot like the Noodles and Company model.
Uh-huh. Shane, you got any that stand out to you? We can't hear you. It looks like you're talking, but I can't hear anything. Nope. Nope. Well, I'll let you keep playing with that. Why don't you just start hollering, and hopefully we'll get to hear you soon. Maybe should I try and re-invite you? No? You can hear us fine, right? Yeah. So okay, great. Well, we'll keep going, and let us just chime in anytime you can, or keep fighting with it. I thought it was kind of interesting too in the case that it gave specific larger chain and kind of more well-known and established restaurants that were in that fast casual segment. I didn't have any idea that there was any relation between like Wendy's. Which one was it? Wendy's and Cafe Express, which I'm not familiar with.
Was it Baja Fresh?
Baja Fresh, yeah.
Yeah, and Chipotle's with McDonald's.
Yeah, that was kind of heartbreaking for me because I really like Chipotle's, but I've sworn against McDonald's, so it's obviously much different. But yeah, I mean, I guess they know their stuff, right? They know how to get people to buy food. So that was kind of interesting too, seeing some of the comparisons, and I don't know how many of those are where you are. Here in Provo, we get pretty much everything under the sun as far as fast food goes, and yeah, so there's a wide variety, and Chipotle actually just came into Utah County at the University Mall, so largely very excited about that too. So what were some of the challenges facing Noodles and Company within this segment that they kind of broke themselves into?
Competition. The competition for those other companies with real estate and hiring people and capital. I think those were the three. Oh, and customers.
And customers, yeah.
I also think there was a lack of, real work experience, and so they basically started from the ground up, where they just said, "Hey, we're going to start a restaurant," and they started it, and they had a lot of learning to do in those first couple of places that they set up. But I think the idea was sound, and because of that, I mean, they were able to kind of get through it. But I mean, really, just kind of just kind of that classic entrepreneurial story of, hey, I got a great idea, let me start it, and we're going to crash and burn for a few years until we can kind of get out from underneath us. So.
It was a good case study for Shane because that's what he wants to do, open up his pizzeria.
Yeah.
Can anyone else hear Shane, or is it just me that can't hear him? Can you guys hear him?
I can't hear him either.
I can't hear him.
He needs some raw signs.
Looks like he's fighting with something else. So, yeah, it was pretty fascinating that they just were like, all right, we're all in, and hit the ground running without going anywhere, because they hadn't done any of the prep work or research, really. I mean, they started their research after they'd opened up a couple of restaurants, which I thought was pretty interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but I mean, they kind of have the same challenges that any new business has, right? Like, just like Jenny was talking about, like there's customers and real estate and building, like it's the same thing with everyone. They just it seems we're less prepared than other people that really try and break through and be successful.
Well, I think they were more prepared than my parents were. I mean, my parents tried opening a convenience store on the way to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina in the middle of the gas embargo, 80s. And they didn't sustain business because they didn't have enough capital. They didn't have enough working capital to get to the point that the economy was doing well. But Aaron Kennedy has his wife's salary plus a few investors.
And he did have some pretty good experience that seemed like he had a good head on his shoulders, right? Like he left it sounded like some pretty prestigious jobs to pursue his dream, which kind of traps a lot of guys, right? Like they're successful and they know how to be successful, but I don't know, that kind of surprised me that he had such specific training like that and kind of had a harder time applying it immediately. I mean, obviously he learned from it, and it ended up working out okay because he had the work ethic. But yeah, those were a couple of things that I thought were interesting regarding that too. But yeah, definitely having the little bit more sustainability from his wife certainly helped out.
With him doing the marketing end of the Oscar Mayer and PepsiCo.
And Pepsi, yeah.
Yeah. He didn't have to worry about capital at all. The capital pipeline was established for generations. So that is probably the biggest pressure of owning your own business, is the capital to stay in business until it catches on.
Yeah. Well, and I think he still went through that. I mean, he had to raise $1 million in about 4 months, and so I think being able to have those connections, I think, helped him. But at the same time, it was still a learning curve for him. And I know a lot of people that are really, really good in their profession, but if they were to change it, they'd probably be lost too, even if they were very similar, just because they're not doing the same thing. I think that's difficult for them to handle.
I don't know that I would ever want to own a brick and mortar business after watching my parents. It sort of sullied me to the concept of doing that because I watched them lose everything.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
there you are.
Hey.
Hey, welcome back.
All right.
So
what did you think
in the
of
last
it?
10 minutes or so?
Sorry, what was that?
What did you think
what are your
of
thoughts? Yeah.
Some of the thoughts as far as him opening up the business. Well, I guess going back to the very first question, we do have a Cafe Rio here, and I love it. We have Noodles and Company. We have Zupas coming in. So, I mean, it's a lot like Utah where whatever you can think of it's coming in. But Noodles and Company is definitely one of my favorites. It's that fast casual. I like being able to order, sit down, relax for a little bit, and then bring in the food to us. I thought he had a good plan. I felt he rushed it a little bit, but he still did pretty good. I definitely can see little things that I can look at myself and go, okay, maybe I do need to slow down on this aspect, or I can speed up a little bit on this aspect because I do want to open up my own restaurant. So in that aspect, it was able to help me kind of see some things I needed to slow down on. So.
Right on. That's cool that you've got that personal application to learn from here.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not planning on opening up any kind of a restaurant within the near future. So, I mean, they're still good plans and good ideas. But yeah, that's cool to have someone. I don't know if any other group is going to have someone that's a restaurateur as well. So, cool. So as part of the analysis, this is kind of where I wanted to spend the majority of the discussion. Where the first question or prompt is working full time as an employee while developing a new business a good idea or a bad idea? So I think for Kennedy here, it allowed him a little bit of freedom, right? Like he went into that new job there in Denver where he said, well, look, I've got this idea that I'm passionate about, so I'm going to give as much to you as I can. But I mean, it says in the scriptures, no man can serve two masters, right? And so it makes you wonder if he had more time that he didn't have to commit to a full-time job, how much more successful would his first restaurant have been, or how much quicker would that success have come if he wasn't split in a couple different directions.
Yeah, and I think it all depends on the person. I think that a person's greatest source of income is their employment, and so if if they're leaving just on a hope that something will work in, I mean, there's some aspect of, well, they might work harder, but if the idea has no legs, I mean, that's a very risky thing to have to do, and they may not be able to get out of it. And so I think the fact that he had a job and was able to kind of work his way out of it because of how the restaurant took off, I think for him, and maybe even in like my situation with a family and different things that I'm worried about, that may have been an easier way for him to get into the restaurant business, was by kind of easing out of his employment into this new idea.
Yeah, I know for me personally, because I actually get to stay home, so I'm full-time dad and then go to school. It allows me to focus on not just the schoolwork and the kids, but I can sit down and actually take the time, especially when they're napping, and to go over ideas and to write down things for the job. I think had I been working, I may not be as far as I would be now with the plans and ideas of opening up the business. So it's hard to say. It definitely depends on the person.
Yeah, pros and cons to each side for sure. So I worked for a couple of guys about that sold security systems for about 7 or 8 years, and they had a pretty substantial savings, so they didn't have to work while they started this new idea that they had. And I started working with them a couple months into their brand new business, and they kind of seemed to take the worst part of both worlds, where they weren't really working because they had a ton of money saved, and so they didn't really feel like the urgency, the fire to really get this idea up and running and devote 100% of what they were doing, because they had a lot saved and it had some pretty decent success early on, and so they weren't really working at a different full-time job, but they weren't really working in their new full-time job either, because they just were kind of soaking up their savings and living off of their dream of this new idea that they had. So it was interesting reading this too and seeing kind of how it probably should have been done instead, where Kennedy slowly brought in guys that he knew were successful, that he really could rely on to help him get this idea up and running, and give it as much as he could, while still, as Brady was saying, bring in that reliable income before he devoted 100%, right? Cool. Any other thoughts on the idea of working while developing the new idea?
I find it very hard to work and go to school at the same time. I can't imagine trying
Working
to.
and working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, so the next question: Can Noodles and Company maintain their corporate culture through aggressive growth? Why or not? Why not? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's going to be very difficult, and part of that is because when you have a specific culture that you're trying to implement in a company, it takes time to develop. And so what they're doing is they're bringing people from existing restaurants into the new restaurants and training them and getting them up and going. But you can only do that so many times and still have the growth that you want, but also maintain the growth with the quality that you want. And so I think they're battling kind of both ideas of, how quickly do they want to expand, but how much as well do they want it to be the same type of restaurant no matter where you go. And you can see that from companies that have been established for 100 plus years. When they expand, it is a very they have specific things they get done, and they're very focused on it. But a lot of these new startups, they're still trying to figure out their identity and culture, and so if they're trying to do that at the same time, it becomes very difficult to meet those demands and those goals that they set for themselves.
I think that if they tried to do, where they were talking about ways that they could expand, and one of them was franchising, I think that if they did the franchising, they would be less likely to keep that culture that they were wanting to keep.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree with everybody as far as the culture and the aspects of growth and everything, and bringing in too many people too quickly, and trying to teach them your core values and how everything's set up and everything. It just makes it way too difficult to expand without a lot of hiccups. You can always strive and push, but just be ready and know that there's going to be some difficult things coming along the way as the faster you try to expand, there'll be more issues along the way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key differences between this fast casual section of fast food, because like, what does McDonald's care, right? You're in line for a minute and a half, you get your food in 30 seconds, and then you go sit down, right? Like, there's not really a cultural experience there. But this is like what Kennedy believes in almost more than anything else, right? Like, yeah, sure, the food has to be good, but it's really about culture, because recipes can be copied, and so he realizes that that's not really his big concern. But if you give control or ownership on any level to other people, and especially as you spread out across a country, that culture is really, really hard to maintain. So at work, I work in a call center. I manage a team in a call center, and we have a satellite office up in Logan. So we're down in Provo, where 80% of the employees are in the main leadership, and then there's this Logan office that has been going for about 6 months now. And I hear just the craziest stuff about how things are up there, because it's separated. It doesn't have the roots and the foundation that we've had after 4 to 5 years of the same leadership and the same growth and learning experiences. And starting the satellite offices, there are a lot of things that are really hard to maintain across a 2-hour drive, let alone dozens of restaurants across a nation.
Yeah, I know that in the case study he was talking about, Kent, what was his name? Aaron was talking about hiring a vice president so that he could focus on one part of it, and then the other guy, the vice president, could focus on another part. But I'm not sure that he would even be able to be successful at keeping that culture he was wanting and expanding as fast as he wanted without hiring more people to cover territories, like somebody under, or a group of people under the vice president that manage territories. It just seems like he's trying to do something, trying to keep control of all the aspects, and he's got to let some of it go.
And I also think, you get into a position where the culture is kind of there, you go to another place, that culture is going to start to evolve on its own, based on the community it's in, based on the employees that they have. I mean, you get to a point where, okay, we have this culture established, but then you have 3 team members change locations or change jobs, and you get new ones in, and then the culture starts to change. And so without a constant training or a constant reminder of what the culture is, it's almost impossible to maintain. And so again, you're battling this two-headed monster of growth versus culture. And without that system in place, it's very, very difficult to maintain.
Yeah, and on the other end of that, when you go into a community that has its own culture, how much pushing against that culture do you do to make it conform to yours? An example of that is my son-in-law is a dean at one of the proprietary colleges there in Utah, and the proprietary college originates from Minnesota. And they came into Utah thinking, oh, we're going to change them and help them be like we are. And the more they tried to push against the Mormon culture, the more the Mormon culture started pushing back. and until they realized that they had to hire people that were local to be able to learn and adapt to the culture that was there in Utah, they weren't going to be successful.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Brad, I really agree with what Brad said as far as location and culture and stuff. I mean, I worked at Verizon Wireless, and I worked in the Boise area, and one day they asked me if I would go out to Nampa, which is a half-hour drive, and talking about night and day between the customers, what they expected from you from service, what they were going to buy. I mean, everything. People in Boise, they were going to buy the big fancy phones. They were going to buy everything you threw at them, from the $100 speaker to the $60 covers. Caldwell, Nampa, completely different. They're farm people. They want a basic phone. They want to throw it on their hip, and they want to be out.
Demographic.
Yeah.
It's a different
Demographic.
Yeah.
And it was crazy to see how a half-hour drive in distance, 20 miles, 30 miles, it was night and day. And I can only imagine it's the same way with Noodles and Company, McDonald's, Burger King, anywhere. That the people that you hire and the people that you get are completely different. So
another story. I don't really want to go into too many details on it, but my wife used to work for Victoria's Secret. She was a manager there for a couple of years. And so here in University Mall, she had all kinds of crazy stories, but the store manager was not LDS, and she just would ask Amy Beth the craziest questions about just like why people here in Provo didn't buy certain product that flies off the shelves everywhere else, and my wife would try and have to figure out how to explain without really explaining too much, why she couldn't expect that to happen. Like, they'd have to make their numbers in other areas, not including some kinds of products. I don't know. It's kind of funny, but it's just kind of the same things, right? Like, Provo is obviously a much, much different market than New York would be, or Southern California, where I'm from, right? Like, not just in business world, but in everything, right? Like, yeah, it's a challenge, I'm sure, for large business owners like this that want to expand, trying to figure out, like, do I really want to put a Noodles and Company in a college town like Provo, where Mormons might be considered cheap, right? Like, people don't really tip very well here because we're all poor college kids. So is that kind of a restaurant really going to thrive, or is it because people are cheap, or will it get off the ground because kids want to go on dates, but they don't want to drop $15 a plate for a meal, right? So, yeah, it's pretty funny trying to think of those differences and gauging where you can really have that kind of success. And when this business started 20 years ago in 1995, I don't really know how many of these kinds of restaurants there were. It kind of sounded like he was a little bit of a pioneer. I don't know how much peer-to-peer comparison there was. Do you guys know anything about that?
No, the case had just said that by early 2000, 2003, that they started to see more of the new culture. But it was really they really basically had fast food and sit-down restaurants, and that was it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it just started coming out. I guess when I was in high school, I remember seeing them start to pop up in Utah, where you had just kind of this mix in between, where it was faster than a sit-down restaurant, but it wasn't quite as expensive as some of these other places.
Sure, yeah. I guess maybe Red Robin might be considered one of those, but that I still consider that more of like a sit down, right? Not really fast food.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It would have to be something that you ordered at the counter and then went and sat down and they brought it to you. And I can't remember the first, I'm trying to think, the first one of those that I ever went into was probably in Utah.
crazy.
Yeah, I think for me it was Cafe Rio. I mean, I mentioned that earlier, but I remember in high school going to the Cafe Rio down the street. It was just a little bit different. I mean, you kind of got your food and you don't have to tip a waitress or anything, and
Sure.
it was a lot better than getting a Big Mac or whatever. So
Most definitely better than a Big Mac. So
here in Oregon, at least in the Eugene area, there's not a lot of these fast casual kind of places. There's a local company called Cafe Yum, and then there's the Chipotle's.
okay.
And I think there's one Baja, but that's all that we have. So it's still relatively new in this market, but it should fit because it's a hipsters kind of town, and that's the demographic that they're looking for.
Yeah. So we'll just kind of cruise over the early results real quick. He opened the one store there in Denver and then the other one in Wisconsin, and really didn't have a whole lot of great success in either spot, really struggled and didn't really have the reporting or the accuracy to know that they were struggling, right? Like when they opened up the other shop, he didn't know that they were 4 months without really turning over much profit. The crazy thing to me was that it said that he maxed all in. He knew what he wanted, so there's a lot to be said for that, right? Like he was definitely devoted and committed and seemed to follow the right steps, but again, didn't really, I think, have that established maybe experience in the market or
You needed to hire a bookkeeper.
Yeah.
how do you start a business without knowing numbers? I don't know, but again, back to those guys that I worked for, they kept their payroll on a yellow notepad, so it happens. It's kind of scary what people do, but yeah, so I thought that was interesting. And then the next step is building momentum. And so what do you guys find is kind of a turning point for Kennedy and his team?
For me, I would say that the turning point was when he took him and his other people around to other restaurants, and they started asking questions.
Sure.
And they started figuring out the little things because they obviously had the money. They were getting more money. They had 2 stores. They were thinking of opening up a 3rd location, but they realized that they needed to refine what they had because, yes, the business was open, but they weren't getting in the people that they wanted. And so they were like, okay, well, what do we do? And so they went out and they started actively searching and seeking and trying to find those answers to help them figure out how to make their restaurant what they wanted it to be.
And they tweaked their menu.
Yes. So.
Which is a constant thing because people like new.
Some people do. I don't really like new. I don't do change very well. I have my handful of restaurants that I like, and I get the same thing every single time I go.
Well, I can honestly say, as far as Noodles and Company, I've tried everything on their menu because it is so small, and I do know that you can vary it a little bit here and there. So I mean, as far as like for me, the pan noodle, the man, what is it? It's the Japanese pan noodles. I know I can switch that up just a little bit, but that's my favorite, and I go back to it all the time too. So I'm kind of the same way, but because the menu is small enough and they have refined it so well that it's here it is, it's very small, and it's easy to order off of, and I think that helps them too.
Cool. Yeah, I think the kind of wake up as their place flooded. I mean, I don't know what their establishment was like, but I think that was kind of the seed that got them thinking about, okay, well, we really got to figure out how to be in the restaurant business, right? And actually do the market research and the research about how to lay out their store and how they wanted to just move forward. That would be pretty terrifying to come back and realize that your place is flooding and not really have the structure in place to progress. Especially, I mean, they're already talking about, like Shane said, talking about opening up other restaurants when they had those problems. And but I don't know, they were spreading themselves pretty thin without really having that foundation, I think, right? So um, that that'd be terrifying. I mean, like Brady said, you know, having a wife and kids and having a family at home and starting this new idea that you're super passionate about and really amped up for, but then not having the results to show for it, and then in fact having huge setbacks like that, that'd be pretty scary.
Yeah.
So. All right, so next one is just kind of about their culture. They had the mantra, every guest, every bowl, every time. And then the question was, how does that help form their corporate culture and drive profits and structure? So I think I've only been to Noodles and Company once, and I wasn't honestly floored by it, but do you guys have any experience with that or something else similar?
I know that American Greetings spent a lot of money getting us, the employees, to know their slogan that they came out with like 3 years ago, and it's, we share happiness, laughter, and love. But I struggled with, as they were making us, testing us on that, I struggled with, does the customer really care that we're sharing happiness, laughter, and love? They spent a lot of money on this, that when they could have made the merchandisers felt like they were a bigger part of the company just by giving them something other than a pin that said love.
Yeah, and I think you know, every company needs a focus and a goal, and I think for Noodles and Company, I mean, it's a great focus, but again, it's not established. I mean, they don't have an established brand where you say, oh, I like Noodles and Company because it's extremely consistent. I mean, you don't walk into the restaurant and think, oh, this is a very consistent, I get the same experience every single time, even though that's what the company wants it to be, you know, with every bowl, every customer, every time. You know, I think it's great options and a different experience, but, you know, I think they almost are trying to force a culture there that needs to develop on its own. And it will take time to do that, but Noodles and Company is like the last place I think of where I get consistency, and that's kind of what that shows to me, is they want to be consistent and they're really not.
Well, and I think part of that stems from the people they hire, right? Like, if you want to be a waiter, then you're actually going to go to a place where you get tips. So, I mean, the minimum wage for those spots might be better than working at McDonald's, but are they really going to get like a mature person that's really going to buy into that and be committed and devoted to Noodles and Company, right?
If they follow through with those what do they call it? Incentives, you know, when you meet your quota and you get a bonus. They said that they're hourly employees. If the store in a quarter met their goal, they got bonuses. I mean, that would be a pretty good incentive for an hourly wage person to think, if I meet the quota for this month, then we get $100. Woo! I'd work harder for that.
That's fair. Cool. So, and then the momentum, we talked about that. I guess so. The next part, the next part that I wanted to talk about a little bit was the application and some of the connections. So, just as far as really establishing that culture, Kennedy definitely had. He was passionate about that, just as he was about the quality of food, right? So, what evidence was there of poor and good implementation? Is there something as far as like the culture or maybe the expansion goes that, as you were reading it, you just were thinking, man, this guy's an idiot. Like, he's gonna look back at that and think, what was I doing?
I'm reading through my notes. I think he did pretty good. if anything, he was a little overconfident and didn't have enough contingency plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think he overcommitted his expansion goal,
Mm-hmm.
and just from the beginning, I mean, his whole idea was growth, which is interesting because a lot of times you go into business not to necessarily grow, but to just have success.
Right.
And so, I mean, if he were to have, even 5 restaurants, and they were running and being successful, and then be able to reevaluate and say, how can we now apply this? But from the get-go, I mean, he had these 2 restaurants. He's like, we're going to have 40 by this date. And, for me, it was just mind-boggling because that just is not a very common way for a business to set its goals as far as expansion goes. And so, because the number of locations doesn't necessarily mean success, and so that for me that was kind of a little bit off because then that became the goal as opposed to how do we create the best restaurant ever or something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it was. Sorry, go ahead.
It reminds me. So Safeways, Albertsons just bought out the Safeways company. I'm assuming nationally, but here in Oregon they did. And because of antitrust laws and too many Safeways and Albertsons in too small an area, they had to sell some of them to Hagen's. And Hagen's is an upper dollar amount store, the very high dollar kind of people. And they tried to expand so fast that now Hagen's is in bankruptcy, and they're having to sell back to Albertsons here in the Eugene area 2 of their stores. So that's an example of overstretching your goal.
That's funny. Yeah, and so I thought it was interesting that he brought up the principle of if it'll succeed in more than one spot, it'll succeed anywhere, right? And so that's, I mean, to go from Colorado, like why pick Wisconsin? That was pretty random to me, but I mean, they must have been pretty different markets, but then they invested in the one property too where it was next to other stores that had left or were just not at all, yeah, right? And so you don't really think Walmart and then like a $12 to $13 meal at the same time, right? Like Walmart always has like the Subway or the McDonald's in the corner. They have here anyway. So I mean he kind of had, it sounded like he had good ideas, just kind of the implementation was poor and not really, he just was super eager, right? And I mean, good for him for being excited about it and moving those wheels, but man, it just was so fast. It just was so fast.
It seemed almost like he was trying to develop the brick and mortar fast so that he could sell it off for a high dollar, though. Mm-hmm. That was his strategy in reality.
Yeah, kind of like Brady was saying, like he wasn't looking to really set roots where he was and have that be his gig. Like he had some pretty starstruck eyes as far as what he believed the potential could be, which again is crazy because it sounded like maybe part of that is because he was the only one really in the arena then, or one of the first, and so he thought this is really going to blow up, and I got to make sure that we are there every time that it does. I don't know, pretty interesting. So I think the last one here, what gospel principles, or were there any scripture stories maybe that came to mind as you were reading this and kind of thinking about his situation versus other guys and the success that he had? One of the things that I thought about was Nephi and building a ship, where he definitely knew what he knew what his goal was, and he knew that he needed to do it, and he was definitely committed to it. But I mean, it's not like he said, "Okay, I'm going to build a ship," and then started like weaving logs together or something, right? Like he had his plan first before he started taking hammer to nails or however it was that he did that. So that was kind of something that I was thinking of, that he had his goal in mind, and he had very specific steps that he knew he had to follow first before it would be successful for him. So is there anything that you guys thought of, or any other connections to other gospel principles?
Well, I think from a leader perspective, I think he showed a lot of humility in basically being able to step back and reset a couple times what the expectation of the store was or what it looked like. I think that was part of what saved him is he was willing to say, this idea is working and this one is not, and so we really need to fix what's not working. And he wasn't too proud to just say, well, we're going to make it work anyway. He really
my thing. It was my idea, and we're doing it this way. Dang it!
Yeah, and so I think from that aspect of things, I think that helped him a lot with him trying to be more successful, is just by having that a little bit of humility in what he was doing.
That would go along with the scripture about kicking against the pricks.
Yeah.
Perfect. So any ideas on how he should move forward? His kind of main thing was whether or not he should franchise or just keep everything all on his own. What are your last thoughts on suggestions on how that works? Obviously, like I said, I don't follow Noodles and Company on a regular basis, so I don't know what they ended up doing. But
well, and I think it's just kind of that that market itself, that this type of restaurant business that they're in, and we've seen it a lot in Utah. I mean, we have a lot of these types of restaurants coming through, but you get to a point where after you're in one or two markets, you have a specific number of stores that the company can manage, and then after that you have to start franchising, and I think he wasn't willing to give that up, even though he needs to understand that it needs to happen, because he can't. As a company, you can't manage a lot of these types of restaurants the same way you would manage, like a hotel chain or a bank or, like a retail store, because this is a food thing. And so once you get again into these different cultures, that's why the franchise piece works, is because you have an idea and, the type of environment works, but you let the franchise adapt to the culture and then let it kind of run and be successful.
Also, with the franchising, it keeps that particular store or restaurant from oversaturating the community because it's geographical.
Yeah, that's really.
But I don't think
he is in his career.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Wait to franchise. I think if he did a public offering for a little while, slowed down his growth a little bit, then paid back the public offering, and then when he wanted to go worldwide or nationwide, go franchise.
Yeah. Yeah, I just don't think he was ready to give up the reins yet to start franchising. I think one of the reasons he was struggling with it so much is because he probably knew that was the answer. You can't argue with the success that yields, and it makes sense to do that, but that was kind of his baby, right? Like he built it from the ground up and was obviously really successful with it. And so I think he probably just was kind of, it wasn't a question of if, but when.
Yeah, and I had put that down as one of the opportunities, is the fact that he didn't recognize that it needed to happen sooner. I think even through the end of the case, he was still focused on, okay, I can still do this. Maybe I'll do franchising, but I don't want to, so I'm not even going to think about it. And when he got to that situation where he needed to make that decision, he didn't have enough information. And I think that was one of his pitfalls in the whole situation too.
Yep. Cool. Well, gang, I think that'll do it for tonight. Any other last thoughts on Noodles and Company or any other restaurant that you think we should ought to try sometime soon?
I think that's it. And so as far as next week goes, we do not have a meeting. It's Thanksgiving, and this is the only class that I have that kind of gave me the week off, and so I'm kind of glad. I think there's still a paper that we need to write, but that following week, I'll go ahead and take care of the group. I think it's my turn, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
Great.
So.
Well, thanks, guys. I'll go ahead and so do I email the link to each of you as well, or do I just post it in?
You can just post it on the discussion board. So.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah. Have a good weekend, guys. Thanks for showing up.
And we're group 11. Don't let that other group steal our group number. We're
okay. I'll put exclamation marks after it. How about that? All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.